the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, nothing says sword-swinging high elf who is not at all pleased with the forces of evil like the golden hue of a Hickman painting. Gift certificates abound as the holidays, like Mario Kart, enter lap 3 and get faster and harder to complete without falling into an abyss. Plus, part 40 of the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Shadow of Freedom. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen editor Tony Daniel. We have an interview with another legendary Baen cover artist this time. So far we've talked to David Mattingly and Bob Eggleton on the podcast, and now we add Steve Hickman to the list. Steve has done over 150 Baen covers over the years. He's probably best known at the moment for his 14 covers for the Man Kazin Wars story anthology series, and for David Drake's RCN series. Steve is the winner of 7 Chesley Awards, a Hugo, plus he's been a longtime judge and instructor for the Illustrators of the Future contest. Steve's latest cover can be found on Man Kazin Wars 14, which is now out at booksellers everywhere. We'll talk to Steve in a moment, but first, Laura Haywood-Corey joins me for the news.
We're heading into last-minute shopping time, so we want to make sure everyone knows about the Baen Ebooks gift card. You can put any amount that you want on a Baen Ebooks gift card and print out a certificate so you can have it wrapped and have it under a tree, and you can give it to anybody who loves great science fiction and fantasy.
That's right, and we should also remind everyone that if you happen to get a new tablet or new e-reader for Christmas or winter solstice or whatever, you can populate it with 43 free ebooks from the Baen Free Library.
These are some really good books, too. A lot of them are the first in a series, like Eric Flint's 1632 or David Weber's On Basilisk Station.
The way to find both the free library and a link to purchase gift cards is to go to baenebooks.com. Right there on the left sidebar, you'll see those links. If you're using the mobile site, by the way, we'll put those 43 ebooks in your account, and they'll be instantly downloadable or readable on the web just by signing in to the mobile site.
So we're still beta testing the Baen mobile site?
Yeah, we're getting it pretty ironed out now. If you want to use it, go to baenebooks.com/mobile. And we are giving out a limited supply of free ebook coupons so that the beta testers can put the ordering system through its paces. In fact, it might be interesting to see what kind of response we get from our podcast audience. Let's give a free ebook voucher, in other words, a free ebook to redeem at baenebooks.com, to the first 10 people who write in and ask for one.
Hey, is the address mobile@baen.com?
And it's mobile at Baen.com. Yes, it is mobile at Baen.com. MOBILE at Baen.com. And please, if we send you one of these ebook vouchers, use it on the mobile site to order your ebook. So help us out and help yourself to a little loot. The address to send in for is mobile at Baen.com.
Sounds like a win-win situation.
I want to welcome Steve Hickman to the podcast. Hi, Steve.
Hey, how's everybody?
We're doing all right. Steve Hickman has been a Baen artist from the get-go. Would you say you've done over 100 Baen covers, Steve?
I was thinking about that while I was looking through my cover proofs, and I'm guessing it's got to be 150 to 200, closer to that, maybe even more. It's quite a few of them. Seeing those cover proofs, it's title after title I've forgotten about. I found what had to be the first book I ever did for the non-existent Baen books is the first one I sold to Jim Baen when he was an editor at Tor Books, and that would be Magus Rex. It was a painting he bought out of my portfolio when I went around looking for work over there. He'd actually been an editor at Ace Books, as a matter of fact.
Oh, sure.
I met him first at Ace, and then met him at Tor, and then he started his own company, Jim did.
Yeah.
And so I've been working with Jim good Lord, for 40 years.
Well, and from the beginnings of Baen, we're going to have our 30th anniversary next year, 2014. Will be 30 years of Baen, and
Whoa.
that'll be 30 years of Steve Hickman too, I guess.
Yeah, no wonder. You can do a lot of paintings in 30 years.
Steve has been an artist and illustrator for over 3 decades. I guess longer than that now.
4.
He's the recipient of a Hugo and 5 Chesley Awards and lots of others. He's been
7 Chesleys.
7. My God, it just keeps piling up. He's been a judge in the Illustrators of the Future contest. He's the cover artist for the entire run of David Drake's RCN series. He creates both fantasy and science fiction art with equal aplomb. And here at Baen, he's probably best known for his 14 covers and counting for the Man Kazin Wars anthology series, created by Larry Niven. Man Kazin Wars 14, by the way, is newly out in trade paperback. Steve's Baen covers include a great favorite of many, which is also Tony Weiskopf, our publisher's favorite, that being the cover of Sassenach, a book in the Planet Pirate series by Anne McCaffrey and Elizabeth Moon. Tony calls it the Mona Lisa of SF cover art, and I'm looking at it right now, and I see what she's talking about, that enigmatic smile that the main character has on there. She's in a giant spacesuit, looking out. Steve's recent covers for Baen include the covers for many of our classic reprints, such as Andre Norton books, Children of the Gates, and Ice and Shadow. But boy, that Ice and Shadow cover is great, by the way, Steve. I love it.
Oh, thanks. I think you'd like that, too. It's hard to impress my wife after 40 years, but she looked at that and told me I needed to get it framed up, so I got it hanging in the house here. By the way, before I forget, that Sassenach cover, your comments on that cover will delight the model for that picture, Suzanne Fleury, who has also posed for any number of other of the David Drake covers. You'll recognize her on just about every one of them.
Aha.
She's a natural for that. She gets that look in her eye and look out. There was another reference photo I've got of her with a shotgun looking deadly, and boy, I tell you, you get that dead look in the eyes, and it's like, is this the sweet young person that was just here a second ago?
Well, you're also the artist on Win Spencer's upcoming Tinker novel Wood Sprites, and on Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's Leodin Constellation short story collections 1 and 2, and just it goes on. Steve, your work can't be categorized, I'd say, but when we think of a Hickman cover, I think we think of a romantic, maybe Baroque look, lush, maybe intricately composed. And there's this golden hue you've achieved that's often present. And Kelly Freas said of your work, and I quote, "No one since Rembrandt has mastered the use of gold the way Hickman has." Maybe you'll give us the secret to that. But first, are you still painting on canvas? What's your medium these days?
I like to do any kind of painting now in oil color. I used to use acrylic a lot for the science fiction stuff. And it's a very traditional regimen that I use for that. Stretch my own linen canvas and size it with hide glue, and then you put the ground on it, like an oil ground or an acrylic ground paint on that. And, the whole deal, heavy canvas stretchers. So you end up with an object that a collector can prize. It's the straight traditional thing that's been used for hundreds of years. The secret of painting gold, by the way, is to drive yourself nuts trying to do it. What you have is a reflective surface that never tarnishes, that has its own color and yet reflects the ambient color of whatever predominant color scheme that you've got. And I can't let it alone, but it drives me nuts every single time. It's one of those kind of things like clouds that you just paint until it looks right and then you stop. Clouds are even more bewildering because they do all this reflective kinds of things and they diffuse light through themselves, and it's just completely illogical. I still haven't figured it out completely from all the clouds that I've seen. The Hudson Valley is full of clouds, by the way. Very good place for clouds.
That's where you are?
Yes, that's where I am at the moment. Very picturesque, poetic place, Washington Irving country. Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah. So, can you take us through the process of creating a book cover, how you go about it, how long it takes, etc.?
Well, this happens slightly differently or radically differently every time I approach it. The average book cover, which I did for years before they started sending electronic manuscripts, is to sit down and read the whole thing and mark off possible scenes. This is when the publisher, who respects my judgment, will give me this, full rein on selecting the scene that I want to illustrate, which I think is very important. There are some art directors that think they're earning their pay for the larger companies that will tell you which scene to do. I mean, it saves a lot of time, but some of them will even send this inane little sketch that completely lobotomizes the whole vision process. That's why I have been working for Baen continually since Baen was founded, is because of the artistic freedom. Once I got Jim's respect on being able to sell books, he let me literally do anything I want, with the proviso that if I got way off into the weeds, he would push the panic button and say, "We're committing bookicide," and then I'd start redrawing things. But you start with a manuscript, select a scene, start doing drawings. Sometimes I will get the idea for a book cover talking to an editor on the phone. The whole thing will just appear immediately, and I'll do it that way. Sometimes I get through the entire sketch approval process, color sketch, and painting, and then the whole thing clicks into place, which is really annoying. And then I have to redo it, which I have actually done with Jim one time for the Toxic Spell Dump by Harry Turtledove. There's actually two paintings that are involved, and a fragment of the first painting, which I have since destroyed, provides a sort of decorative thing to the table of contents. But the painting on the cover is literally the second complete painting. So I've talked to other artists about that too, where they've actually started over when the notion, the way the cover should look, clicks in. And that's what painting is all about. Imaginative painting, like we're doing, is the most difficult because you can't always find models for what you have to do to paint pictures of. There's no dragons out there. There are no magic flying cities out there. And you have to look at nature using that as a springboard and make things believable. And that takes a vision. And after a while, the more you use it, of course, it's like weightlifting. The stronger the vision gets. But sometimes the vision process, for whatever that mechanism is in there, it just gets stuck. And you can try too hard. You can go through the whole thing. Even Frank Frazetta was talking about that. I was talking to him about that, and he said, sometimes I work for a whole week trying to figure out an idea. And for him, who could do a painting in a day or a day and a half or 2 days, that was an incredible use of brain power. When he was working on the Conan covers, he would really literally turn them around in his mind until he got something unique. And it really worked.
It sounds like that every painting, every cover, every painting is a start over process almost with you as far as conceptualizing. I mean, of course, you still have your skills.
It's true. That's a very good way of putting it. It's a first time process, and you have to dig deep into the whole process of inspiration. I think the mechanism that goes into a creative person that actually keeps working is very complicated. I don't want to try to understand it, because if it isn't broken, I don't want to fix it, But you just do what you do. It's very instinctual, but there is a matter of inner vision, and that inner vision springs from some kind of emotional inspiration, an obsession with the beauty of nature, say, that you want to pass along in some form. It's like a little kid that sees something that's got to tell somebody about it. I must have been really annoying as a little kid. My parents were very patient. fortunately, they were very supportive of the artwork, too. So it sort of developed as a habit.
Yeah. Can you tell us something about your background and development? How'd you get to be Steve Hickman, multi-Chesley Award winner, artist extraordinaire?
Well, that's interesting. My parents in the Foreign Service, and we traveled around a lot. In the process of stopping over in Beirut at the airport, I found a copy of Famous Monsters of Filmland that had an article by Dick Smith on making latex masks, foam latex masks. So for a long time, I wanted to be a makeup artist. So I learned how to do all this lab work and make lots of crazy stuff, which I still do, as a matter of fact, occasionally for little theater productions around here. And then after seeing Roy Krinkle and Frank Frazetta's covers for the Ace Burroughs reprints in the 60s, I got diverted into wanting to do that kind of magic stuff. That magic was just as powerful as the Dick Smith thing. Frazetta and Krinkle took the classical form and added that element of vision to it, an absolute magic. And that was a real education. I'd gotten art history for years and years and couldn't figure out why we were learning art history. Because in the days before photography, any painting was priceless because that was the only kind of image you could hang on a wall. So there was lots and lots of formulaic stuff. Classical music had a lot of formulaic stuff. Maybe all art has a lot of filler. But then came the Renaissance, and a lot of the visionary art took the form of religious art and classical stuff. So it's all about vision. Well, you can get kind of stodgy in the classical form too, but somebody with this elemental kind of Sicilian imagination comes along. Frazetta had this mystical vision of things that was just enchanting, and it generated an entire 2 or 3 generations so far of fantasy and science fiction artists, imaginative artists. They all adore Frazetta, even though some of his work even looks simple or simplistic by comparison to modern paintings. There's an element to it in its simplicity that's just untouchable.
Would you put Frazetta as a foundation science fiction fantasy artist in the same way of like Heinlein being a foundation Golden Age writer? Or?
Oh, no question. And Roy Krinkle has to rank right up there with Frank Frazetta. As a matter of fact, it was Roy Krinkle that got Frank into doing the covers. And a lot of Krinkle's work has that same mystical kind of quality to it, a real magic quality. And Krinkle himself was a fascinating individual. If you've ever seen Back to the Future, think of Dr. Emmett Brown, and you've got Roy Krinkle. But Roy was even more thoughtfully eccentric than Emmett Brown. Very, very quirky character, but just an absolute magical kind of person. Both he and Frank Frazetta were really fascinating and very good to us a long time ago when we were kids.
So what about kids today? You've worked with illustrators of the future. What path do you recommend to young artists who want to do something like what you do?
First thing I would say is you have to learn how to draw. And where you learn how to draw is you get a copy of George Bridgman's Complete Guide to Drawing from Life, learn the human skeleton, and learn how to draw people. That was the first thing that Frazetta did, as a matter of fact. I keep going back to Frazetta, but you can't pick a better example. He borrowed that book for 3 days, drew everything in it in his notebooks. And his notebook amounted to nothing more than a steno pad with lines on it, but he drew all the pictures in Bridgman and then returned the book. And the guy said, well, you can keep it longer if you want. And Frazetta said, that's all right, I've drawn all the drawings in my notebooks. You have to learn how to draw. And out of that, you will learn how to make your visions convincing. And whether you do digital or traditional media, you have to know how to draw. It's much more direct and easy. You're not learning 2 things at once. If you just have a pencil and a piece of paper, you know how to draw. If you know how to draw and paint, by the way, the translation to digital media is an afterthought. there is no transition. You just pick up a different medium and you're doing the same thing. There are advantages to one and there's advantages to the other. But you have to know how to draw. That is the vital thing. And I have talked with other teachers, other professional artists that teach occasionally. And they're just shaking their heads. The kids nowadays just sort of grow up and think they're entitled to start working for companies and stuff, especially if they know computers. But the computer isn't going to do it for you. You have to do the drawing. It's all your work. There's no trick to it. You have to know how to do it. And there are certain things that you have to know in your mental toolbox. One of them is human anatomy. If you learn the human skeleton, there's only basically one other skeleton. It's a quadruped skeleton. And there are variations on the quadruped skeleton, such as the horse and the dog. But if you know those two body types, you can draw anything. If you can draw a human body, you can draw spaceships and other stuff. But you have to have a sense of design, and that's all about what hand you're dealt with in the talent line. You play your cards with what you got. You know how to draw.
Let's talk about literary influences for a moment. I know you're a huge Tolkien reader. Who are some of your other literary favorites, and how many have you illustrated covers for over the years?
Wow, my literary favorites, go outside my genre. Neil Stevenson and William Gibson, are absolutely brilliant writers. Those are probably my two favorite writers living today. Patrick O'Brien for the sea stories, brilliant. Oh, it just goes on and on. That would be a whole podcast right there, and I would have to sit down and make a list. We did a list on Facebook the other night of favorite books. I never thought when I was in high school reading Robert Heinlein that I would be doing a lot of paintings for Robert Heinlein. I did several for Baen books, and then did some more for the Heinlein Trust out of Houston. Is planning on issuing a limited edition leather-bound thing. It's going to have about 8 or 9 of my paintings in that.
Well, you were talking about Twain, following a Twain trail as well.
Yeah, Mark Twain is always one of the most powerful American literary figures. He's credited with creating the American voice. I was just reading Huckleberry Finn recently. The Innocents Abroad and Roughing It are the three that I love the best. There's some really amazing stuff in all of those books. Tom Sawyer. So there's 4 that I keep rereading. Charles Dickens just writes like God's anointed. And there's that relentless, needling, clever use of commentary all the way through his books in Dickens.
Do you find that reading plays into your work, or do you do it to escape your work?
Both, mostly to escape, but sometimes it ties in so beautifully. When I get a manuscript like for the Manx-Zin Wars, it's like getting paid to read the finest science fiction, some of the finest science fiction short stories written today. When I first started doing the Manx-Zin covers, I knew I was going to be doing a series, so I wanted to create something that had a series of visual images that I could maintain. So I actually deliberately did not read the stories, but I talked to Jim Baen about what the characters were like and the basis of it, and then invented my own imagery. And then the authors started describing the scenes in the previous cover in their stories. So it sort of synthesized right into the work. Occasionally I will talk with authors on the telephone and work out things like that, and they'll describe the covers perfectly right into the stories. Mark Van Name is the most dramatic example of that. Every time I've done a cover for one of Mark Van Name's books, and they are brilliant books, just wonderful writer, nobody can read these stories before he turns them in complete to the last, comma and punctuation mark. So he will describe a scene that I'll select. I'll paint the picture. When he sees the picture, he actually writes that literally into the story. So every one of the covers you'll see for Mark Van Names were done that way. A cover I did for John Ringo's Princess of Wands was like that. We were crunched for time, so I just talked to John on the telephone. And he was running a brief synopsis of each of the stories, and I got a flash of a cover, and I went, hey, here's what I'm seeing. And he said, great, it's in the computer, I'll just do it that way. I'll just describe that scene. Actually, two of them, because we ran into a marketing glitch there. When John was describing the story, I didn't get the sense that it was a science fiction story. And what I was seeing was a classic fantasy thing. So the one figure that I painted in there has fantasy clothes. And Tony called me and said, look, we need to put this in the science fiction thing. So I got another model and dressed in contemporary clothes and painted the figure and photoshopped it in over the other one. So there's actually two in two different sections. There's one in the fantasy section, there's one in the science fiction section with the same title. That's a nice painting. I like that one. I still have that one too.
Well, what are your favorite covers? I mean, it's hard to pick among them, I'm sure, but do you have any Hickman covers that you can say, yeah, I really got that one right?
Yes, actually, I was looking through the cover proofs, and I think my favorite of all of, say, maybe about 15 of them, is the John the Balladeer cover I did for a Manly Wade Wellman collection of short stories. And there's actually an eerie story behind that. I was painting on some picture for some company that was material that I was just not really into. Sometimes, if you've read the stories before, you have a lot of enthusiasm for it. There's just all the cover possibilities just bubble up. Well, anyway, I was painting on something I didn't want to do particularly, and I actually said out loud, why doesn't somebody send me a cover of something I'd like to do, like Who Fears the Devil by Manly Wade Wellman? Okay, well, so I went to bed, got up, and there was an answering machine message from Betsy Mitchell, who was the head editor of Baen at the time, saying, we have a cover we'd like you to do. We're not sure it's your material. It's John the Balladeer by Manly Wade Wellman. So that was eerie. I thought, well, maybe I better just do this right. You say something like that and it happens, and it's just about time to get serious about it. So I did the best cover I could, and it's still one of my favorite paintings. And David Drake loves it, said that the editor was edited by Carl Edward Wagner. Mm-hmm. He loved it too. I think Manly had passed on at that point.
Well, they were Wagner and David Drake were great friends with Wellman.
So I understand. I really enjoyed talking about Wellman with David Drake. And then another cover that I really loved was the Planet Pirates cover. The woman in the powered armor, flying powered armor. And that's the same in that Sassenach series. I used Suzanne Fleury as the model for that one, too. And I took the pose from a picture in Air and Space magazine of this airmail pilot, with a 3-day growth beard and a cigarette standing there in his leather flying suit, Wild Bill Potson, or whatever his name was. And that one that did it for me. And then the first cover I ever did that a publisher called me up and said, we love this cover, was a David Drake cover. Let's see, what one was that? Lacey and His Friends.
Yeah, I'm sitting here looking right at it.
Yeah, everybody they called me up and said, we really love this. And man, I worked and worked. This was before Photoshop, and I was doing tracing paper overlays to design all the machines, painted acrylic. It's really detailed. Nice little painting. And
yeah, he's got a look on his face that just communicates that character perfectly.
Yeah, and David was happy with that too. That was a great character, and I was so impressed reading that book. That was probably one of the first really good books. I had been doing reprints of this old stuff, the Golden Age, so-called, for Ace Books for years. and from the ace doubles and so forth. And that was, I had the artistic freedom there because nobody cared. Nobody was going to read all that old stuff. They were just going to reissue it. And that was where I sort of learned to paint covers. I was thrilled to get a manuscript, or a book to read. They weren't buying stuff out of my portfolio anymore. I was actually doing specific stuff. But this was the first real book that I got. I thought, wow, this is great. So I was glad that I got the reaction on that. And then there was a second cover that I did that actually everybody in Baen Books thought enough of to actually call me up and say, we really love this. And we got a great reception from the business meeting where they show it to the reps and the distributors and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first Man Kazin Wars cover.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is why I have a real loyalty to Baen Books, is because I get feedback. The rest of these companies that I've worked for are so impersonal. You're just the hired help. And if you do something that they really love, the last thing they're going to do is tell you about it because you might ask for more money, Another reason that I like working with Baen Books is because Jim just would try literally anything. He let me try to take a picture of a sculpture for the Cthulhu, the Tales from Cthulhu Mythos cover. I did my first completely digital cover for a Steve White book called St. Anthony's Fire a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And when I discovered Photoshop, The Change Winds by Jack Chalker, Baen actually issued two different versions of the same cover that I had tweaked in Photoshop because Jim said the collectors love that kind of thing. So it was delightful to try out all that stuff. The foil thing that has turned into a kind of a plague was my idea too, because when I was just starting out, I did private commissions that way. I would do a complete metallic underpainting and glaze transparent colors over it. So that's where a lot of that underfoiling came from.
We reissued the First Man Kazin Wars anthology this year, the 25th anniversary edition, and
hey, no kidding.
Oh yeah, it's got your cover on it.
Cool.
The original.
Okay. Another one that I really like is the Dracula tapes by Fred Saberhagen. That just turned into a nice bit of work, and Jim went in there and tweaked it slightly in Photoshop just to bring up the highlights and so forth and so on, and it made the cover look just beautiful. And the painting is really cool. I like to sit there and look at it. It's got all these details. Just the character of Dracula started with the historical Vlad Tepes, which is the title is a play on words. That's why Jim chose the Dracula tapes from Vlad Tepes. Mm-hmm. And then I'm looking through these other ones. Good heavens, there's some new ones. Bertram Chandler First Command cover with all the colors and people in gold flying spacesuits. I love doing that sort of old pulpy stuff updated.
Yeah, you did all the covers of our John Grimes Bertram Chandler reissues, the John Grimes Saga 1, 2, 3, 4. We got them all.
Yeah. And another one that the authors were delighted with was Fallen Angels. And I actually was given a chance. I called Jim up and said, "Look, I need some work here," and he gave me the cover again. I said, "Look, I can't. Everybody loves that first cover." He goes, "I know. I just want to see if you can do better than the first cover." That when I got introduced to Larry Niven, of course, I get introduced to Larry Niven over and over again, and it's gotten to be the point where I think he actually knows that he has seen me before. Larry is almost as absent-minded as I am. And Jerry Purnell, his partner, is such a character. We had been fellow guests in Chattanooga 2 weeks before I saw him out in Los Angeles at this party. And Jerry's going, "I'm willing to bet that my partner doesn't even remember that we were out there judging this masquerade contest." And he brings Larry over and said, Larry, this is Steve Hickman. You remember him from Chattanooga? And Larry is standing with his eyebrows raised like, he's waiting for the punchline, right? So we judged that masquerade contest in Chattanooga. Larry is still waiting, and he goes, this is the artist that did the Fallen Angels cover. And then Larry goes, oh, that's a good cover.
Well, at least he might not remember you, but he certainly remembers those covers.
Well, he remembers me now because I sent him a T-shirt with a dragon on it, which was done from one of my designs, and it's his favorite T-shirt. So I think that was a sort of a visual cue. I love both of those writers as people and as writers. Jerry Purnell and Larry Niven are really, those would have to be influences too on the literary side. This is the only, maybe they've done another cover for something else they've done. I keep forgetting the titles at this point.
Well, what are you working on these days?
Yeah, I've got 3 projects going. I just finished my second novel, a fantasy novel. I'm working on sculptures, H.P. Lovecraft-based sculptures and fantasy-based sculptures. Getting ready to try and get a line of those going. And a series of fantasy commissions with the nice canvases and all the rest of it. I'm painting the 5th version of an idea that I got a long time ago that never quite worked out. Occasionally I get hold of an idea that I feel a certain vision for and I just can't do it. A picture from The Metal Monster by A. Merritt went through 3 different incarnations. The third one took me like 20 years to finish, completely redoing it and repainting it until I was happy with it. And this one is the 5th version of a really interesting, it's a young lady riding on a winged horse with a city floating in the clouds in the background. The high fantasy stuff, basically.
So when you get a commissioned piece, do the people, does it vary, or does somebody tell you what they would like, or is it they're just like, we want a Steve Hickman painting?
The last one that I just mailed off was one of those things where they said, we want a Steve Hickman painting, and I said, what kind of stuff do you like? And we just agreed all the way down the line on this, the imagery and stuff. He likes dragons. He likes ladies with no clothes on. So I've got this supernatural sorceress type lady leading a dragon through this strange fantasy landscape. And that one was just completely generated during the phone call. Sometimes I'll have sketches that are just these ideas that won't leave me alone, and I'll go and pester some people that I know and say, hey, I would really like you to commission this because I want to do this painting, and I'll show them the sketches, and if they like it, they'll do it. And then sometimes people say, I want a Tolkien painting. Now, those are about the hardest series of paintings that I've ever done. Illustrating Tolkien is very difficult for the odd reason that Tolkien was a genius who could take stereotype fantasy stock characters and do something completely magical with them because of his command of language and his ability to invent fantasy languages that nobody's been able to touch since. But you're left with that whole archetypal stock character lineup of elves, dwarves, goblins, and heroes. Okay? Now, that is so easy to fall into the default setting kind of idea characterizations. To get beyond that into something that approaches the poetic magic that Tolkien is able to generate in a reader is really difficult. And I was doing this raised border treatment and this, raised scroll thing, which, makes the things twice as hard anyway. So I wasn't making it easy on myself. But I've got another one of those Tolkien commissions pending and some other interesting things. I worked out a whole series of ideas in a subtropical realm based on my first fantasy novel. And ladies scantily clad shooting bows and arrows in tropical settings with gold domes and so forth, which I love painting. There's just something really wonderful about all the interesting shapes, starting with the ladies and going through the trees and if you paint fantasy architecture that will fit in the setting, there's something really nice about the whole thing. It's an artistic resonance. There's a vision to it that I can really be enthusiastic about.
Well, do you have any words of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Words of wisdom are so subjective. I can pass along a couple of bits of advice, and some of them sound so simple as to be completely laughable. But the more you think about them, the more profound they get. It's like Roy Krenkel. He would throw these things off. He said, if you're drawing something and you see something in the drawing you don't like, take it out. And, that rang a bell, and I've been thinking about that ever since. Every time I get into a thing, there's something vaguely the matter with a thing, I'll just look at it and say, I don't like that, I'll take it out. Works like a charm. It's brilliant. Learn how to do the skeleton. That was Frank Frazetta's advice. Well, I did that.
Those of us who aren't artists, looking at a book cover, you get it immediately. It sells the book to you and says something about the book to you, but then it grows on you over time because you keep looking at it every time you open the thing. What could you look at to see what the artist has done other than just what it evokes in you?
Well, that's a very powerful kind of thing, and it's I know when I buy a book for the cover, and I should know better if anybody ever did, then it's a very important part of it. I keep rereading The Mastermind of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs just because it has one of the most absolutely brilliant and wonderful fantasy covers ever painted. It's a collaboration between Roy Krenkel and Frank Frazetta. That magic of the book cover is what put Conan back on the map. I mean, that's just pulp writing, but you get a magic cover to it, and it provides a visual key that provides an entire background to the whole series of stories. It's an amazing thing that you can do with that. I swear that's why I keep working at it, because I want to be able to create work that will keep sparking people's imaginations in years. I've actually talked to generations of other artists that, I've been doing that. It's kind of weird hearing that, because it seems like yesterday I was saying that to somebody. And since I work in sort of a vacuum, a lot of artists do that. You just sit there and you just do the paintings. You don't know if anyone's seeing them or not. And it's almost a mild shock when somebody has seen them and has been collecting the covers. That's what I love about Facebook. This is great marketing research. You find out there's a lot of people that have been seeing this stuff. But very few people have seen the important work, and that's why the art book is going to be really important, which will be out soon, folks.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we've been talking with Baen cover artist extraordinaire Steve Hickman, the creator of dozens and dozens and hundreds of Baen covers. Thanks so much for being with us, Steve.
My pleasure, Tony. Thank you for calling up for the interview.
And now we continue with our complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Shadow of Freedom. This portion of Shadow of Freedom is provided by Audible.com. Get the complete audiobook at Audible.com now. If you're not a subscriber, you can get the entire audiobook free or choose from more than 100,000 other titles when you try Audible free for 30 days. Okay, here's what has gone before. After a fierce war, Honor Harrington's star kingdom of Manticore has entered into a simmering, low-level conflict with the ancient, aristocratic Solarian League. The Solarian League is crumbling, and on the verge, a region at the edge of its empire, rebellion is brewing. The Solarian Office of Frontier Security is in charge of keeping the peace on the verge. Brutal tactics and puppet dictatorships are par for the course for the OFS. Rebels opposed to the oppressive regimes can't hope to match the military might of the OFS without outside aid. Royal Manticoran Navy Admiral Michelle Hinka, Countess Goldpeak, commands the RMN forces in the nearby Talbot Quadrant. Gold Peak is sympathetic to the rebels, but is looking for the right place to strike a blow on their behalf. In the Mobius system, solid ground and space forces have arrived to put down rebellion against the Solarian-supported puppet government. When Royal Manticoran Navy Commodore Sir Avers Terrakov shows up with a sizable detachment of Gold Peak's fleet, it's the Solly's turn to sweat. The Royal Manticoran Navy has arrived. Here is part 40 of David Weber's Shadow of Freedom.
And I don't give a good goddamn who the hell it is, Brigadier Francisca Ussel snapped.
But, ma'am,
Commander Watson began desperately.
That's a super dreadnought. We can't fight a super...
That's enough, Ussel barked. You don't even know who it is yet.
At those acceleration rates, the only people it can be are the Manties,
Watson replied.
And if it is,
they have exactly zero right to be there. Ussel shot back. Mobius is a sovereign star system. The Manties have no legal standing here at all.
Ma'am, I realize that, but given what happened at Spindle, I think we have to assume...
You're not going to assume anything until I tell you to, Commander. Is that perfectly clear? Ussel glared at him from his communications display, gray eyes flinty. He stared back at her for a handful of seconds, then nodded jerkily. Better, she said in a marginally less angry tone. She sat back in her chair and waved one hand in an impatient gesture. I understand why you're anxious, Commander Watson, but let's not let panic start dictating our reactions, all right? Yes, they hammered Admiral Crandall at Spindle. And yes, as far as I can tell, the Manties don't have a single functional brain cell among them. But not even Manties could be stupid enough to actually open fire on a Solarian Navy squadron in the territorial space of a Solarian ally.
With all due respect, ma'am, they fired on Admiral Byng in New Tuscany,
Watson responded, and her nostrils flared. Yes, they did, Commander, she agreed coldly. But New Tuscany wasn't a Solarian ally at the time either. And whoever this is, it's not that crazy bitch Gold Peak either, not in command of a force this small. No, she shook her head. This is some captain or commodore or junior rear admiral, and whoever it is probably doesn't even know we're here yet.
Ma'am, you're senior to me,
Watson said.
But their track record suggests to me that they might just go ahead and pull the trigger after all.
Francisca Ussel closed her eyes and counted to 10. What she really wanted to do was to rip someone's eyeballs out, Watson's preferably, but almost anyone else's would have done in her present mood. Why? She wondered. Why does every single idiot in a Navy uniform think the friggin' Manties are 10 meters tall? Why can't any of them see that it doesn't matter how good their damned missiles are? They're one little pimple of a star nation, and Frontier Security should have squashed them years ago instead of letting them get so fucking full of themselves, them and their precious wormhole. They think it makes them the lords of creation, that their shit doesn't stink. But they're about to find out differently, aren't they? That maniac Gold Peak's gone too far, and now her precious star empire knows exactly how a cockroach feels before the hammer comes down. Personally, Francisca Ussel couldn't wait for that moment, and she was getting sick and tired of so-called officers who couldn't get their heads out from their asses long enough to realize that any Mantie with a brain bigger than a radish had to be scared shitless of pissing the League off even worse. Commander, she said after a long, fulminating moment, there's no way the Manties would risk another shooting incident with the SLN, especially in a podunk little system like this one. Whatever they may have managed to do to Admiral Crandall at Spindle, I doubt they brought their damned system defense pods along with them. And even if they did, they have to know what would happen to them in a real war with the League. Gold Peak might be crazy enough to push it, but by this time, Their government has to be trying to figure out some way, any way, to crawl out of the crack she's gotten them into. If these bastards had gotten here before us, managed to help the friggin' terrorists overthrow President Lombroso, and then sign some sort of treaty with the new government, that might be one thing. But they don't have even that much of a legal fig leaf. That leaves them with no standing at all under interstellar law, and the League would have every right to assist Lombroso in resisting any demands they might make. That's a tripwire nobody in command of a force this small is going to want to cross. Watson looked at her calm image, trying to believe she might be right. Unfortunately, he didn't think she was, and even more unfortunately, she was in command.
"So what exactly do you want me to do, ma'am?"
he asked finally. "I don't want you to do anything, Commander. Just sit there. They're the ones intruding into Mobian space, so let them do the talking when they finally realize we got here before them."
"And if they start making threats, ma'am?"
"Then you tell them to go straight to hell, Commander," she said flatly.
"Coming up on 31 million kilometers, sir," Commander Lewis announced. "Thank you, Stilt."
Terekhov took another sip from the cup of coffee Chief Steward Agnelli had just delivered to him, then looked at Lieutenant Montella.
"Are you ready to transmit, Adelante?"
"Yes, sir." Montella grinned at him. She was rather looking forward to this. "Whenever you are, sir."
"Fine. Helen?"
Terekhov smiled at Helen and held out his coffee cup.
"Take care of this for me for a few minutes, would you? It probably wouldn't help my hard-bitten Commodore's image."
"Oh, I don't know, sir." She smiled back as she took the cup obediently. "Personally, I think it might actually underscore your aura of confidence."
"Of course it would. Just don't go drinking it."
"Wouldn't dream of it, sir. Joanna would hurt me." Terekhov chuckled with a bit more amusement than he actually felt, then turned back to face the calm pickup.
"All right, Adelante, let's do it."
"Sir," Lieutenant Chang announced, "I've got a comm request from the Manties." Commander Watson looked up quickly. The announcement was scarcely unexpected. In fact, the tension of not hearing from the Manties had been twisting his nerves tighter and tighter as the silent juggernaut of those tactical icons swept steadily towards his own outnumbered and outgunned command. They'd been in system for almost 2.5 hours now. In fact, they'd made their turnover and begun decelerating 48 minutes ago. The range was down to 31 million kilometers, under 2 light minutes, and he'd started sweating the moment it dropped to 40 million. If they'd brought along any of the missile pods they'd used on Admiral Crandall, he was inside their envelope, and they were still better than 20 million kilometers outside his. He knew everyone else on his command deck could do the math as well as he could, and he'd seen the tension growing in his officers' faces as the minutes crawled past. Yet there was something about Shang's announcement.
"Calm down, Branston,"
Watson said.
"Let's not get too excited here."
"But, sir, they're asking specifically for you, and they're transmitting from less than 40,000 kilometers out."
"What?"
Watson straightened in his command chair.
"What do you mean, specifically for me? By name?"
"Not by your name, sir, but they're requesting SLNS Oceanus's commanding officer." Watson stared at the communications officer. None of his ships had activated their transponders, so how the hell could the Manties possibly know his flagship's name? And what was that about 40,000 kilometers? How could anybody get a communications relay that close without any of his sensors even noticing it on its way in? And why should they bother to, even if they could?
My God.
The thought hit him like a sudden bucket of ice water.
My God. They didn't just get a comm relay that close. They got sensor platforms that close. Close enough to read ships' names off our goddamned hulls, and we never saw a friggin' thing.
The implications were terrifying, and he suddenly wished Franziska Ussel was up here in orbit and he was safely down on the planet.
"Very well, Branston,"
he said as calmly as he could, suppressing a sudden urge to lick his lips.
"Put it on my display here."
"Yes, sir." The small communication screen deployed from his command chair came to life with the face of a dark-haired, olive-complexioned young woman in the black and gold uniform of the Star Empire of Manticore. For a moment, nothing about her struck him as peculiar, until he suddenly realized she was in uniform, not wearing a skin suit. "I am Lieutenant Adelante Montella, Royal Manticoran Navy," she said. "Am I addressing the commanding officer of SLNS Oceanus?"
"You are,"
he said, his mind still grappling with the absence of that skin suit. It was like a deliberate declaration that the lieutenant on his display was beyond any range at which he could possibly have threatened her. Which was true enough, he supposed, but still.
"I'm Commander Tremont Watson, Solarian League Navy,"
he continued.
"What can I do for you, Lieutenant?"
He sat back to wait out the 200-second light speed delay, but, "Please stand by for Commodore Terekhov," she said, less than 2 seconds later. He twitched, his eyes flaring wide open. That was impossible. They were still more than 30 million kilometers away. Nobody could...
"Oh, shit,"
a little voice said, almost calmly, deep down inside.
"They do have FTL-COM capability, and if they've got recon platforms that close, platforms that can send back targeting data faster than light..."
He closed his eyes for a moment as the implications crashed over him.
"Good evening, Commander Watson."
A blonde-haired, bearded Manticoran officer replaced Montella on his display. The Manti wore a Commodore's insignia, and his blue eyes were remarkably cold.
"I am Sir Ivars Terekhov, Royal Manticoran Navy."
Every Solarian officer in the Madras sector knew that name, and Watson felt a solid lump of ice materialize in the pit of his stomach as he recognized it and remembered a star system named Monica.
"We are so fucked,"
that same little voice whispered.
"Commodore?"
he replied out loud, fighting to sound normal, and knowing he'd failed.
"May I ask what brings you to Morbius, sir?" "Yes, you may."
Terekhov smiled thinly, and his voice was cold.
"We're here in response to an urgent request for humanitarian assistance." "Humanitarian assistance?"
Watson heard the faint, sickly edge in his own voice as he repeated the words.
"I think that's a suitable way to describe it,"
Terekhov said.
"Certainly in light of the news broadcasts we've been monitoring for the past couple of hours."
Sweat beaded Watson's hairline, but this time he said nothing. There was nothing he could say, really.
"Let me put this as clearly as I can, Commander,"
Terekhov continued after a moment.
"I intend to put a stop to the butchery the Solarian League has been actively abetting in this star system. I intend to put a stop to it now, and I intend to take whatever steps are necessary to accomplish that objective, which brings me to you." "In what way?"
Watson asked, cursing the slight catch in his voice.
"As I see it, you're part of the problem,"
Terekhov told him flatly.
"You escorted the intervention battalions currently operating on Mobius Beta from the Madras sector, and you've been supporting them since your arrival."
Those icy blue eyes turned even colder.
"We've already recorded the evidence of kinetic strikes, Commander Watson, so let's not waste anyone's time pretending you don't know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm willing to assume, for the moment at least, that you're not the senior officer of this abortion of an operation. As such, I presume you were following someone else's orders, which gives you at least some legal cover. As one serving officer to another, however, We both know exactly what you should have said when given that order, don't we? So I'm afraid the technicalities of your chain of command don't buy you a whole lot with me.
Something shriveled inside Tremont Watson. In shame this time, not in fear. But Terekov gave him no opportunity to defend himself.
You have two options, Commander, but only one chance to pick between them,
the Manticoran said.
You can choose to take your escape pods and small craft and scuttle your ships, or you can choose not to, in which case I will blow them and you and every other man and woman aboard them straight to hell from a range at which you won't even be able to scratch my paint. As a general rule, I don't much like butchering people who can't fight back. Given what's been happening on this planet, I'm willing to make an exception.
Those ice-blue eyes bored into Tremont Watson's soul.
You have 10 minutes to decide whether or not I do. Terekov clear.
That was David Weber's Shadow of Freedom, Part 40, read by Allison Johnson. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com, thanks to Laura Haywood Corey, Christopher Chifani, and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the applause of 50 million golden robots strung out across the Milky Way, and a couple of silver dragons one universe over, for Baen cover artist extraordinaire Steve Hickman. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.